Well guys, it's a 1974 Super Bass or Super Lead. Let's have a look. Right, I'm going to flick this thing around and see if we can decode the serial number before we open it up. I actually know, well, I think I know what it is based on what the guy told me, the owner of this amp. He thinks it's a Super Bass. I know it has had work done on it. So when we pull it apart, we'll open it up anyway. We'll know what it is, but let's see. Look at the serial number and see if we can see if there's any clues there. And we can see this wonderful lamp has, let's just call it a makeshift back panel. Okay, let's have a look at the serial number. I'm going to zoom the camera in here and let's have a close look at it. Okay, first thing to notice is that we have a presence pot on the rear. So when we talk about the mods, the owner of this amp, who I've worked on a few of his vintage Marshalls, he's got quite a nice collection now. He did tell me that this amp, he thinks, has been modded with a master volume just placed on the front with the presence moving to the rear. However, let's have a look at the serial number. Right, F is the date code for 1974 and SB/A, so Super Bass. Okay, Super Bass /A, it's 100 watt. So you'd see an SL/A for a Super Lead. So yeah, definitely a Super Bass amp from the factory. But let's have a look when we pull this out to see what's going on. Just got this thing out of the chassis. You can see it's only got a pair of ER34, so it's kind of been running as a 50 watt amp. It's been recapped, the FNTs all the way around, so that's cool. Original iron, also very cool. And I don't know what these are. Let's have a quick look. Not really labelled, probably Chinese, which again, great. Pretty clean. Needs a little bit of a clean up, a bit of dust, bit dusty, but all in all, pretty cool, pretty original on this side. Let's flip it over and have a look. Here we have it, guys. It's pretty clean. I'll go through the things that I've noticed. Very early ST1 board. Okay, these ones are pretty fragile, actually. The traces, you can see them through here. They're really thin, and any kind of serious heat on them with a soldering iron, you can damage them. So, yeah, you want to work on these things pretty carefully. It's a Super Lead spec already, so whoever worked on this has set this up. No longer a Super Bass. The things I've noticed though, there's no bright cap on the treble channel. Okay, here, as we know, right, really common thing to have changed. I should say that my brief here, the owner, wants me to just take this to a dead stock 100 watt Super Lead. So we're going to put a new quad VL34s in it, but also just check this whole circuit out and restore it to the extent possible. Okay, bright cap. The next thing I've noticed here, I will check all these resistor values and so on, right, as part of the kind of service, make sure everything's cool. These are the, underneath here are the two 470k mixer resistors, and you would have a treble peaker, or let's call it a bright cap, on the bright channel, right, which is this one here, but you wouldn't have one on the normal channel, this one here. This amp does, right? So someone's tried to kind of, you know, make the normal channel not as dark by putting that cap there. I'll see if I can get a photo of those and so we can check the values. It's a bit hard to see here. This is a treble cap on the tone stack. That doesn't look original. but it does look vintage, so we'll check that as well. A good set of original mustard coupling caps through the amp here. First coupler, we'll come back to this for a second actually. First coupler here on the treble channel looks like a 0.022 rather than a 0.0022, which you might find in a super lead to tighten it up. So we'll see how the amp sounds, and we'll make a decision about what we do with that based on how the thing is sounding. There's obviously been some resistors here that have been replaced over time as the original ones would have drifted out of spec. That's very normal to see. Looks like a rectifier diode here or two has been replaced over the life of it. Now, let's talk about this presence pot, which is way over here in the rear of the amp. We're going to move this back to its position. So this is the master volume, and you can see, maybe you can, maybe you can't, this is not a post-phase inverter master, which you would normally see a master volume mod on a 4-hole plexi circuit, 1987 or 1959. You would see post-phase inverter master normally on the rear of the amp, and it would connect in here at the 228k bias splitter resistors. Now, so what's happening here is we're coming off the treble wiper of the tone stack, and you would normally see this come straight into the phase inverter input here. Here's the input to the phase inverter, this coupling cap right here. And this wire here would normally come straight off the treble wiper in a plexi. So what we're doing is we're coming off the treble wiper into the input of this pot, and then from the wiper of this pot, this pink wire here, I'm wiggling it, and you can see there it is there, right? So it comes back here, and this is the one that's coming into the entry of the tone stack. So a really simple mod, but it's going to, you know, dump a truckload of gain, right? If you want a plexi that's going to gain up and kind of sound like rock and roll, you need to be driving the phase inverter, and as soon as you put that master volume there, you're attenuating the signal before it hits the phase inverter, so you're really only getting, you know, overdrive and compression in your preamp. Well, at V2 actually. You won't get any at V1 because the stages are in parallel, not cascaded. So it'll be a pretty clean amp with this volume dialed back. It's clean as, right? You're not going to get a lot of grind. I mean, if you put this on 10, master volume's basically out of the circuit, and you're back in business, I guess, with an attenuator, probably. Look, this recap job looks all great. Got no complaints about any of that. It's fine. Interestingly, one of these are original tube sockets for the power tubes. One of them has a 1 ohm resistor on the cathode. Yeah, I'm just checking the wiring on that. So that's for a bias check. Here's what we're going to do. Bright cap's going to go on there. I'm going to check these values. Presence pot's going to go to the front. Master volume's going to come out. We're going to check all the voltages. We're going to measure all of these resistors to make sure they're in spec. And then we're going to have a listen to this thing and see whether it needs any further work. But fingers crossed it's going to come up great. So I've made the changes on this, guys. Put it back to, you know, pretty much stock, right? It's certainly how I like to have a super lead set up anyway. And look, as we know, this amp was pretty close to it, but there were a few changes in here that I wanted to get rid of. The first thing I want to talk about is the arrangement here on the 470k mixer resistors, and I'll bring the camera in here and you can have a close look at what's going on. So here's the 470k resistors here, right? This one's got a 560 picofarad cap on top of it. Not original, but you know, I'm not going to change it out. That cap is okay. But we did have a 5 or a 470 picofarad across this one as well. Now, the way these work in a super lead or 4-hole plexi is this 470k resistor here on this side is for the treble channel, and this one here is for the normal channel. Now, someone had put a cap across the top of this one to make it the same, I guess, or similar to the treble channel, and they would have done that on the basis that they were trying to make the normal channel brighter, not as dark. Now, the problem with this, right, is that it means that you've actually configured now a treble bleed to ground for the normal channel, because if you look closely at the way that these plexis are wired, or have a look at the schematic, and you'll see the signal comes together at the mixer resistors here. If you're plugged into the treble channel, you're coming through this guy, but there's a 470k effectively to ground. I mean, it depends where you've got the normal pot set, right? This is why, one of the reasons why when you change the volume on the normal pot, even though you're plugged into the treble channel, it does affect the tone. It's because this side of these 470k resistors is actually connected to the wiper of the normal pot. Let's just imagine that the normal pot is on 0, right? You've got it turned all the way off. That means that this 470k here, one side of this is set to ground. Okay, if you put a cap across this, you're now bleeding signal high end from your treble channel to ground. So in other words, by trying to make the normal channel brighter, you've just made the treble channel darker. And just while we're down at this end of the board with the close-up, I'll talk about this coupling cap here. I did mention in the first review of the amp as I received it, this was a 22 nanofarad or a 0.022 mic. And I suspected that, for the treble channel, that might be a bit too much bass in the preamp for my liking, and that was the case. I completed my changes on here, or restoration work if you like, tested the amp. Sounded good, but I thought it could sound better. So I've used one of my new old stock mustards here. I don't have many. I've got a couple. I thought the amp deserved it, given it's got a pretty good collection of mustard coupling caps in the amp still. So the guy that owns this amp will be happy. I am sure that I dug into that parts bin and used this, right? So this is the 2.2 nanofarad, or 0.0022, which you would see in the super leads in the treble channel, right? Keeps it nice and tight, or tighter for a plexi. Well worth the change. I really like the sound of the amp after that change. Let me just zoom back out here and look at the entire board again. Restored the bright cap. So I didn't have a 4.7 nanofarad, 4700 picofarad, right? Or 0.0047 microfarad bright cap. This is one of the ceramics that I use in my new amps. Sounds fantastic. These amps need the bright cap in them. I believe I'm all about it. These are great. Right in here is the 100k cathode resistor for the cathode follower, right? It's just shoehorn right in here. I had to pull the board and replace that. The stock 100k resistor was measuring 145k, right? So there's a fair drift there. So I have replaced that with a standard carbon film 1 watt. Interestingly, the 100k that's sitting on V2 here, which is often drifts because it's exposed to so much heat. This is fine. This is measuring about 101k. So it survived, and this one didn't. So I changed that. Everything else on the PCB itself was okay, right? So a couple of changes on the board, put the bright cap in here. Let's talk about the presence pot. So there was that kind of funky master volume in here, pre-phase inverter master for a 4-hole plexi. Is a bit, what's the word? Probably weird is the word I'm looking for. Not that effective, I think. So anyway, we have relocated the presence pot to its rightful position. This is a 5K presence pot, wired the old school way. This is the best way. You do get the scratchy pot when you move it, but the 5K pot wired like this, you get a really nice range through the presence pot. When you move it, you'll hear it all the way. Whereas the kind of newer way of doing it with a 25K pot with a 4K7 to ground, and you can isolate the DC off the pot so it's not scratchy. The taper's all weird, right? You only get your presence adjustment is really in the last kind of third or quarter of the pot, and the whole kind of 3/4 of it from 0 all the way up to 6 or 7 hardly does anything. This is much better, I think. It just sounds better. So with the presence pot moving, we had a hole in the chassis, and so what Marco wanted, who owns this amp, I think it was a good idea actually, was because he's got no impedance selector on this amp anymore, which is very common in Marshalls of this vintage. So we've got a 16 ohm tap here, and we've got 2 here for the 8 ohms. So you could run 2 16 ohm cabinets on these two guys, right? And it's 8 ohms, or a single 8 ohm cab, and you've got your 16 here. So covers all bases there really, because well, you don't have a 4 ohm tap, but not that many people use a 4 ohm tap in my experience. So this amp, guys, we're going to do a bit of a play test through it. It's sounding really good. It's one of the best sounding kind of early to mid 70s super leads I've had the pleasure to get my hands on. Oh yeah, we've got a brand new quad as well. I forgot to mention, right? So when the amp came in, it had 2 EL34s in it, running kind of in 50 watt mode. So you've got a brand new set of the JJ EL34s, which I'm digging at the moment. These are really reliable and they sound great. So the amp's biased up with those tubes. Righto guys, let's put the 74 to the test. The way I've got this dialed in, pretty typical of how I would normally dial in a plexi. I've got the presence pretty high. It's nearly all the way up. 9. The bass is back a bit, it's about 4. It's about kind of 11 AM. Mid's all the way up on 10. Treble is about 1 PM. And I've got the treble channel on 6, right? It's about 1 PM. The normal volume is on 0, and I'm into the high input on the treble channel. No jumpering. And this is kind of the core tone that we've got.